Are going to get started now. Thank you so much for everyone for joining. We have a really great webinar on total rewards, effective compensation packages for nonprofit leadership. I'm very excited to hand things off, but before I do that, my name's Joanna. My pronouns are she, her. I am part of the marketing team here at Edgility, and I'm going to be the webinar support today. So just a little technical information before we dive into the good stuff. There'll be time for participation. We have a few polls, so please be active in those. Also, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. If our team can't get to them at the time, we'll get back to them at the end when we have question and answer space saved. This will be recorded, so and an email will be sent out later with the recording, so you'll be able to access all of this information anytime you'd like. So I will hand it over to our hosts now, to Jennifer Svensson from Edgility Consulting, Dennis Carlson, and Jeff Stevens from Marsh Mclennan Agency.
Dennis, do you want to tell us a little bit
Yes,
about
I can kick us off. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Dennis Carlson. My pronouns are he, him. I'm an employee benefits and executive benefits consultant with Marsh Mclennan Agency. Based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. Been in the employee benefit space for about 20 years and executive benefits for about a decade. And took a brief hiatus a few years ago from benefits world to become a major and principal gifts officer for a nonprofit, found out how difficult that was and jumped back into benefits. So excited that we're all here today. I'll kick over to Jeff now.
Thanks, Dennis. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Stevens. I work with the Retirement Services Division of Marsh Mclennan Agency. I am also based in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been in the industry for about 25 years, where I've specialized in retirement plans of all types and working with for-profit and nonprofit entities. And we're looking forward to talking with you all. Jen?
My name is Jen Svensson. I'm pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a principal at Edgility. I started my career as a scientist, and I have my PhD in cell biology. And I was a cancer researcher for 15 years before I became a mom, and I just didn't see a space for myself in the sciences anymore. I knew I wanted to be at home with my kids when they were little, and I couldn't do experiments from my living room. And so I pivoted all of those data research and analysis skills into compensation and started at Edgility 8 years ago as a founding member of their compensation team, and have worked closely with one of their co-founders and partners to build our compensation practice. And so bring a lot of institutional knowledge to the work that I do, as well as most of my clients every year are nonprofits or charter schools, and just bring a lot of sector-wide knowledge around what staff and executive compensation look like in the nonprofit sector to all the work that I do. In terms of a little bit more about Edgility, at Edgility, equity is the foundation of everything that we do. We practice that internally with our own policies and practices that we develop for our own staff, as well as when working with clients, working with them to move towards implementing policies and practices that are going to be equitable for their organizations. And we do that with the goal of closing wage gaps, closing opportunity gaps, and building leadership benches in our communities that are reflective, or building leadership benches in our sector that are reflective of the communities we serve. We do that across 3 different service lines. They're placing exceptional leaders, creating equitable compensation programs, and then building equitable organizations. And with that, I will hand it back to Dennis to tell us a little bit about Marsh Mclennan Agency services.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Jen. So Marsh Mclennan Agency, we're part of Marsh Mclennan, which is our parent organization. It's actually the global leader in risk, strategy, and people. We're a worldwide organization with Marsh Mclennan Agency having over 170 offices here in the U.S. Really, our focus is around providing local consultants to mid-market organizations to mitigate those business risks while also attracting and retaining talent. Jeff and I both focus on a few different industries, but do a lot of work with nonprofits as well as charter schools and organizations that assist those types of organizations. When we get into kind of what the meat of what we do is, as I mentioned, I work with employee benefits and executive benefits. So we do everything from strategy and design around that to one of the most important things is employee communication. Obviously, we place the products and come up with a strategy, but if it's not communicated well, it's not going to be effective. And then also assist with benefits administration and compliance around benefits packages. I'll let Jeff talk about the retirement planning side a little bit as well.
Sure, Dennis, thanks. So with retirement plans, we're looking at employer-sponsored programs, both those that fall under the ERISA domain as well as those that fall outside of ERISA. And our emphasis has really been on kind of a holistic approach, if you will, where we're looking at broad strategies and making sure that the retirement plan complements the other benefits that are offered within the enterprise. So there's a lot of attention paid to plan design.
Thanks. And it's just outside the scope of this conversation, but another one of our services is around business risk. So we have a complete business risk consulting team that Jeff and I work closely with. That's everything from your business insurance to claims management, workers' comp, liability, directors and officers, and executive liability, which does kind of cross over into what I do as well. Passing it back over to Jen.
Thank you. So before we jump in today, we wanted to start with a poll. So we want to know what are your big rocks for your leadership team this upcoming year, and really thinking about this from a talent and HR perspective. Is it attracting talent, retaining talent, succession planning, leadership evaluation, filling vacant and or new roles, or something other? So we'll take about a minute for folks to input responses. You should see the poll on your screen now, and then we'll share back the results. We got about 28, 29 responses. For folks who want to get in their responses in the last 5 seconds, go ahead and put them in. All right, so I'm sharing this out. So I thought this would be more evenly split. I'm a little bit surprised here, and in a lot of ways not surprised, because certainly in conversations with clients, we're hearing about talent retention being top of mind. So talent retention came out at almost 50%, then leadership evaluation, succession planning, and then a few others after that. So great information for us to have and to be thinking about as we're talking today about compensation and how compensation can be used as a lever for retaining talent. In terms of thinking about this, or starting to think about this, what are the challenges that boards, CEOs, and heads of HR face when they're thinking about executive challenge? So budgets are tight. I probably don't even need to state that one. That one's probably the most obvious one on this list. But and recognizing that funding has been tight or tighter than usual the last 2 years. And not only are budgets tight, not only is funding tight, but also budgets are split across different priorities within an organization. Oftentimes that, one is personnel costs, another oftentimes is program costs if you're a program-based nonprofit. And so you're managing a budget that's already tight and trying to allocate those resources across multiple priorities and multiple initiatives. And so that can make things even more challenging when thinking about compensation and thinking, about executive compensation, which is oftentimes can be the largest pool of resources when it comes to personnel costs. Capacity is limited, and not only capacity of staff, not only capacity of the leadership team, but also capacity of boards is limited when it comes to determining executive compensation, executive salaries and benefits as well. There's legal implications related to executive pay at nonprofits, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail as I get into the next slides. But important to just name that can be a challenge. You have to make sure that not only are you paying in line with the market, that you're, working to pay fairly internally in the organization, but that you're also compliant with the laws around executive compensation. There's equity implications. Where you pay your leaders can also determine where you pay your staff. And so when you're thinking about, as well as benefits, right? So in pay and benefits, when you're thinking about both of those things, thinking about total compensation, it doesn't exist in a bubble. It more broadly influences compensation within the organization, and there's implications to that in terms of what equity looks like across the organization. And then there's just balancing their stakeholder priorities. Sometimes they're competing stakeholder priorities, and you have to work really hard to balance those priorities. The priorities of a board might look different than the priorities of a leadership team, which might look different than priorities for staff, which might look different than priorities for funders. And so a critical piece when setting executive compensation is to make sure that you're balancing those priorities based on those different stakeholder groups. In terms of the solutions, I'm going to start first by talking about base salary and total cash comp, and then I'll hand it off to Dennis and Jeff to speak about benefits. So first, just diving in about roles and responsibilities. The board is responsible for governance and oversight. This includes legal compliance, so ensuring that the org adheres to relevant laws and regulations. It includes policy development as well as risk management, so making sure that you're identifying and mitigating risks, really in acting in the best interest of the organization. Boards are responsible for financial oversight. This not only includes budget approval, but also financial monitoring and fundraising. You typically have fundraising responsibilities as well. Boards are responsible for CEO performance support and evaluation. That involves hiring new CEOs, evaluating that CEO, evaluating their performance yearly to make sure that it's meeting or exceeding the goals that have been set and moving the organization towards its goals, as well as succession planning. And this is a place where, when I'm working with clients and with boards, comes up a fair amount, in that an executive might leave and there isn't a succession plan in place. And that can leave the organization in a pretty rocky place while the while the organization navigates what can be an empty seat within their organization. And so it's critical that boards have a succession plan in place or have thought out what that's going to look like if their CEO or other key leaders were to leave. Boards oversee organizational sustainability, so they're not only thinking, short term or approving this year's budget, but they're responsible for thinking about long-term viability for the organization, as well as crisis management. So what is going to be the process, or what will you do when a crisis arises to help the organization navigate that crisis and remain sustainable and open. Boards are responsible for board development and self-assessment. That typically is recruitment of board members, as well as evaluating the board and how the board is doing its duties in terms of maintaining the organization and moving the organization forward. Board duties has duties related to advocacy and public relations. So that typically looks like being ambassadors out into the broader community for the organization, as well as engaging with key stakeholders in the community. That can be community leaders, donors, partners, or others that will advance the organization's mission. And then boards are responsible for ethical leadership. So they're responsible for making sure that the decisions being made within the organization are being made are ethical and are being made with integrity and accountability, as well as any conflicts of interest are being disclosed and managed appropriately. For leadership teams, they're setting leadership and vision for the organization. So setting mission for the organization, designing a strategic plan to achieve the mission, as well as fostering an organizational culture that will bring the organization to achieve their mission and vision. They manage upwards in terms of collaborating with the board, right, and acting as a board liaison, attending board meetings, collaborating with the board around policy determination. And then they also manage downwards by managing the operations of the organization in terms of day-to-day operations, program management, and then internal operations such as human resources and finance management. They're responsible for financial stewardship of the organization, but managing budgets, fundraising and development, as well as financial reporting, all fall under that bucket. They, as similar to the board, have critical role in stakeholder relations, engaging with the community, serving as a spokesperson for the organization, advocating for the organization, and developing partnerships that are critical for the success of the organization. They're responsible for compliance and risk management, so making sure, again, that the organization is legally compliant, managing against risk, and meeting those ethical standards ethical standards for the operation of the organization. They oversee evaluation and reporting at both the org-wide level, so reporting out performance of the organization out to the board, as well as other relevant stakeholders, ensuring that reporting out is transparent, as well as evaluation of staff internally within the organization, evaluation of teams as well, so staff and teams within the organization, to ensure that they're hitting their outcomes so that the org can hit its outcomes. Boards oversee innovation and growth, making sure that they're thinking strategically when they're innovating so that the org can grow into its full potential, and that they're thinking about capacity as the organization grows into its full potential. CEOs oversee program, so reviewing programs and looking at the data to make sure that the outcomes from programs are hitting goals, and that those goals are going to, again, feed up into org goals and allow the organization to hit its overall goals. and then just executing on the mission, making sure that the organization, again, it's following its goals and moving towards its mission. And then both bodies really oversee fundraising and resource development and strategic planning. Before we jump into executive compensation, I want to just mention some key types of compensation. The first is base pay. So that's the minimum cash that an employee earns for their services. The next is total cash comp, or what we call TCC. That's typically base pay plus short-term incentive pay. So base pay plus things like bonuses, stipends. If there's severance, that oftentimes falls under total cash comp as well. And then there's total compensation, which is the total amount of cash comp, so your TCC, plus benefits, so what the employer pays towards the benefits package for an employee. For executives, we're typically focused on total comp, and so that's why I'm here today to talk about base pay and TCC, and why Dennis and Jeff are here today to talk about benefits, as we want to encourage everyone on this call to be thinking more broadly around what do we want to be thinking about in terms of total comp for our CEOs and C-suite teams. In terms of what the law says, related to board duties as well as related to executive comp, starting with fiduciary responsibilities. Fiduciary responsibilities are governed by federal and state laws and really dictate that members of nonprofit boards must act in the best interest of the nonprofit. So they've got to put the interests of the nonprofit above everything else. Board members have 6 primary duties. Their duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience, duty of confidentiality, duty of prudence, and then duty to disclose. And really 3 that I want to focus on for our conversation today, or just go into a tiny bit more detail on, which are the duty of loyalty to act in the best interest of the organization, the duty of obedience to act in line with existing laws, and then the duty of prudence to understand risks and make decisions cautiously. So this means understanding the laws around CEO and executive compensation and the financial position of the organization, and then making compensation decisions that are going to be in the best interest of the organization. In terms of IRS codes, Section 4958 dictates that the total compensation of disqualified persons, I don't know, fancy legal words, typically executives at nonprofits, must be in line with the total compensation for the same role at similarly situated organizations. If pay is found to be out of line, the offending person as well as the board are at risk of tax penalties. And so the IRS takes it pretty seriously. They won't only penalize the person who's overpaid, they also reserve the right to penalize the board for paying out of line with peer organizations. Typically, what boards are asked to do then is to follow what's called the rebuttal presumption of reasonableness, and that really involves 3 critical steps. That's first, that compensation arrangements must be approved by an independent body or committee, aka the board, composed of individuals who do not have a conflict of interest concerning the compensation arrangement. Second, compensation must rely on comparable data. So the compensation must be benchmarked against pay data from similarly sized organizations in the same sector and region. This comparison ensures that pay is in line with what is being offered for similar roles under similar circumstances. And then third, decision makers must document the decision-making process. So you want to make sure you're documenting the rationale behind the compensation decision, as well as any data that you use to make your decision. You make your decision in terms of compensation, and then that documentation can serve as evidence that you acted responsibly and with due diligence. The last piece I want to talk about today is 990s and salary transparency. So there's also laws around what needs to be disclosed on 990s. Generally on 990s, you need to disclose total compensation for current and former directors, trustees, and officers, so any members of the board, as well as key employees, and then your top 5 highest compensated employees. And there are specific regulations around what does it mean to be highest paid, what does it mean to be a key employee, and it's critical to know that that information, because it's put on 990s, it's transparent. 990s are publicly available easy to find with a simple internet search. And so when determining compensation, you're not only thinking about, how are we in line with the market? How are we internally equitable? How are we legally compliant? There's also needs to be that recognition that that information is going to be shared broadly and publicly, and that can influence staff, it can influence funders, it can influence clients, community members, and other stakeholders that are related or involved with the organization. Moving on to best practices for executive compensation. When we're working with organizations, we're thinking about we're designing structures that take a balanced approach to compensation. And what we're working to balance is 4 different factors: internal equity, market competitiveness, fiscal responsibility, and org-specific context. And so it's critical to name that these factors or variables have interplay. If you pull on one, say if you pull on market competitiveness, you might be less fiscally responsible, right? So you may not be able to have both of those things at the same time. If you pull on internal equity, you might be a little bit less market competitive for a few of your roles. And so when we're working with orgs, we're really thinking about how can we balance these 4 factors, what's the right mix for you all as an organization to ensure that you can achieve your goals and achieve your mission and impact. Yeah, I can list the 4 again. So, and I apologize, I thought the slide was up. That's on me. So here's the slide. They are internal equity, market competitiveness, fiscal responsibility, and then org-specific context. Jumping into these a little bit more, external competitiveness really talks about where you fall externally in the labor market. Where are you coming in the market? Are you below market? Are you at market? Are you above market? Are you at the top of the market? Where does pay in your organization and where does pay for your executives fall? When we're thinking about external competitiveness, critical to that legal compliance piece is our market parameters, ensuring that we are comparing ourselves to organizations that are similar to us in terms of our size, our sector, and our geography. We also want to make sure that market parameters also feed into org-specific context. So that's that last bucket there, ensuring that, again, we're comparing ourselves to similarly situated organizations. It's not appropriate for a small to mid-sized nonprofit to compare themselves to Amazon. That's, a big gap there, but that's just an example of what it means, or example of what it means to compare ourselves to similarly situated organizations. Instead, if you were a small to mid-sized nonprofit, you'd want to be comparing yourself to other small to mid-sized nonprofits. In terms of data sources, you want to be using multiple data sources. There's high variability in executive pay and executive salary. You can have 2 organizations and one executive is $150,000, the other executive is paid $300,000. and they're similarly situated organizations. And because of that variability, it can be hard to triangulate where executive pay falls. And so it's, again, critical to make sure that you're using multiple data sources to help you triangulate where you should be paying your executives, as well as when we're working with organizations. Typically, we're pulling 990 data as one data source. Oftentimes, we're also using industry data sources and salary surveys. Industry databases are generally current as of the first of the month, but salary surveys and 990 data are typically older, and so data should also be aged to be current as of typically the first of the month. And then this last piece is really just thinking about the importance of the total package and making sure that when you're thinking about executive pay, that you're thinking about what does salary plus additional cash comp plus benefits look like. That's critical from that legal perspective that I talked about earlier. So when it comes to the IRS code, they're looking at total comp. Is their total comp in line with total comp at other organizations? It's also relevant in terms of market competitiveness. Is your total comp competitive with where other organizations are paying? Because that's who you're competing with for talent. So if your base salary is competitive, but your benefits aren't, when you're hiring, those candidates may go to the other organization with that better benefits package. So thinking about really that total package and what that means for your organization in terms of how it can compete and how you're hitting your legal compliance. Moving into internal equity, want to make sure that you keep it in line across the org. So if you're picking a target percentile for your executives, it should be in line with the target percentile that you pay for your staff. So if your executives are at the 50th, or if your staff are at the 50th, you should pay your executives at the 50th. If your staff are at the 75th, you should pay your executives at the 75th. You want to be mindful of pay ratios. So what does the ratio look like from lowest to highest paid employee? In the for-profit sector, those ratios can be anywhere from 1,000 to 1 to 100 to 1 to 50 to 1. That's not typical in the nonprofit space. In the nonprofit space, typically that ratio is 10 to 1 or lower. If you're a large nonprofit with hundreds of millions in revenue or billions in revenue, you're going to probably exceed that 10 to 1. But generally for our clients who fall in the bucket of under 100 million, it's typically 10 to 1 or less for that ratio. You want to be differentiating executive pay based on where folks fall on their ranges. So using ranges to differentiate how executives are paid relative to each other based on the qualifications that they bring to the role. And then a question that comes up a lot when I'm working with nonprofits and leaders and boards is around bonuses. Bonuses at small nonprofits, so nonprofits under 50 staff, under 5 million in revenue, aren't that common. They start to become more common when you get over 100 staff or over 10 million in revenue. And you'll see at that point, usually close to about 50% of nonprofits are offering bonuses to their teams. And there's some ways you could be thinking about bonuses in terms of using more equitable parameters, so using things like a flat dollar bonus amount across the organization, or even reverse percentiles, where folks at the bottom of the organization get a higher percent bonus than folks at the top level of the organization, to try to balance out to try to prioritize internal equity within your organization. And then last piece, and critical to bonuses in relation to CEOs and executives, is just having an evaluation process that's fair and equitable in terms of evaluating the performance of those executives and then setting pay for those executives. And so that's something that Edgility provides to our clients as well. We run CEO evaluations for all of our clients. The last piece I'm going to touch upon is just that fiscal responsibility piece. It's important to be thinking about hitting costs. So there's what you're going to pay your executives or pay your CEO. There's also payroll taxes, retirement matches, other things that we don't always think about, but that they cost money to the organization and that they can influence that budget. Anywhere from up to 20% of budget or more can be influenced by hitting costs. And so we want to be keeping that in mind as a board and leaders. What does the full picture look like? Not only what do we see, right, the tip of the iceberg, but what's below the surface as well. If you were to set say comp at the 75th percentile, that can have org-wide implications. So that can mean that staff need to be paid more competitively and at the 75th. So it might cost you $200,000 to get your execs to the 75th, and it might cost you $2 million to get your staff there. So really important to be thinking about, yes, we want to pay our executives here, but could we do that for our staff, and is that fiscally responsible for us? And then last piece is just considering long-term sustainability. So ensuring that comp decisions you make today will compound over time as folks get raises. That $200,000 you gave today with a 5% increase is $210,000 next year, and so on and so forth. And so thinking long-term, what does this look like for a budget perspective long-term? Is our budget going to grow in line with the increases that we're able to give, and will we be able to stay sustainable long-term? And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to Dennis and let him jump in and start talking about benefits and total rewards.
Great. Thanks, Jen. So really thinking about everything Jen just shared around retaining talent, attracting talent, and equity, you need to take the same considerations when you're thinking about those total rewards, those non-cash benefits. So we all know about our core benefits, right? Our medical, dental, vision, probably life, disability, and 401k, and those are core benefits that all employees have. But when we think about executives specifically, we really want to think through what are we trying to accomplish. So when we're thinking about that retention, who are we competing against? Are we competing against similarly situated, whether it's nonprofits or charter schools or social enterprises, or are we trying to retain from people hopping into the for-profit world? And is that a consideration that we need to be thinking about? Those same qualifications come on attracting talent. Where are we actually trying to attract talent from? And that can change in an organization depending on the role, right? So sometimes we are just trying to look for those with nonprofit or similar experience, and maybe whether it's in the space that we work in specifically, or if it's an adjacent space, but maybe it's out of a for-profit industry. And so what are the expectations coming out of those industries as we're trying to attract talent? And who are the people that are in those roles today, and what are they thinking is going to be provided? And I think setting an expectation around attracting talent is really one of the keys, and aligning your benefits package to not just simply look at, hey, what are similarly situated organizations doing, but what's the rest of the market doing? Because it doesn't mean that you can't make changes to your benefits package that still fall in line with everything Jen shared about fiscal responsibility and the board oversight, and something that will get approved by your compensation committee, but maybe makes it more attractive to the actual folks you're trying to attract and or retain. And then I want to talk about equity as it relates to benefits a little bit. So Jen did a great job explaining around cash compensation and that internal equity around that compensation. And quite often, by the time we get into an organization, either the compensation's already figured out, or they're working with somebody like Jen and her team on a compensation strategy. But a lot of times, those organizations have thought about compensation only in that cash compensation component, but not around equity for the total rewards component. So I'm going to have Jen, you can go to the next slide, but I want to get into equity specifically around that total rewards component. So when we talk about executive benefits with any organization, we're really breaking that down into three R's. I'm gonna only talk about two of them today, but that first R is restoration, and that second R is rewards. And rewards are probably what you normally think of when you think of executive benefits, those extra perks, extra things you're doing for executives, maybe to attract them. But I want to start with that restoration piece because this is really where the equity conversation comes in. We don't pay everyone the same in most organizations. There are a few organizations that try to have complete pay equity, meaning they pay everyone exactly the same. But in most of our organizations, we're not paying everyone the same. But there are a number of employee benefits that you already have in place in your organization that protect compensation, protect people against loss of compensation. Those three benefits are life insurance, disability insurance, and your retirement plan. All three are tied to compensation, are meant to protect income. Of course, life insurance in the event of an unexpected death provides compensation to the employee's family. Disability insurance protects their paycheck. If they're sick or hurt and can't work, they receive a monthly paycheck while they're unable to work. And of course, their retirement plan is for after their working years, those funds that are protected for them when they're ready to move on to the next phase of life. But when we think about executives, those three benefits are great for most of our employees, but for executives, they may be undercovered due to the maximums instituted by the group plan that you have in place. And I'll just give you a few quick examples so we can kind of highlight this and you can think about what that looks like in your own organization. But when we're talking about life insurance, typical life insurance policy, and these can range, but your group life insurance policy that you provide to employees might be a flat $50,000, but many times we see even a voluntary offering that offers employees the ability to purchase 3 times their salary, which is going to be a great benefit for most employees. But those benefits are usually capped at maybe $250,000 or $500,000 in a death benefit. So if we're looking to get 3 times salary for our employees, that's probably not working for our executives. They're probably not getting that 3 times salary goal with a $250,000 or $500,000 cap. And again, most organizations we talk to, they're not setting that cap. That's set by the insurance company. So then we need to look at a supplement for those executives to get them the full coverage that the other employees have. Same thing on disability insurance. Most disability insurance policies we see from an organization pay 60% pre-disability earnings. If someone's sick or hurt and can't work, they'll get 60% of their salary paid. And typically those caps on those policies in a group setting are $5,000 a month or up to $10,000 a month. Again, a great benefit for most employees. But when we're talking about our executive teams and our leadership teams, instead of protecting that 60% of salary, that was our goal, we're really seeing maybe a 20% or 30%, depending on their salary, coverage, which is really just not going to be effective for an executive. And then Jeff will talk more on the retirement plans in just a little bit, but you can think about your retirement plans and what that deferral amount is that you want employees to be able to put away. And of course, the IRS caps those deferral amounts. But thinking about how do we set that up for executives so they can put the money away for their retirement that they're going to need to maintain that style of living. And then on the executive reward side, so once we've kind of looked at that benefits restoration, and what we do is a benefits restoration analysis. We just take a look at exactly what you have and do an analysis and just show you those gaps. Once we've established that and said, okay, here's where we are currently, and here's where we could go to restore those benefits for executives, that's when we start having a conversation about those additional rewards. What are the things now that we want to do? Because we're really trying to either keep this person for a long period of time or attract people that aren't going to be compelled by just the standard benefits package. They're going to need some additional things. Just a few examples are deferred compensation or deferred bonus arrangements. Again, Jeff will get into this in the retirement planning. But we also see executive medical reimbursement plans, long-term care plans, and then identity and cyber protection is something that we've seen a lot more interest in from an executive benefits standpoint. You can go to the next slide, Jen. So I'm going to pass it over to Jeff, and he can talk about ERISA retirement plans and non-ERISA retirement plans.
Thank you, Dennis. So let's talk a little bit about how retirement plans fit into this discussion. So we'll look at the options that are available to nonprofit organizations. So incidentally, ERISA stands for the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. And this is legislation that governs really both health plans and retirement plans. And it was passed in 1974. So happy 50th anniversary to ERISA, which is now governing what we do today, but for the most part has stood the test of time. So for nonprofits, really the big decision these days is whether or not to have a 401k or a 403b. In the past, a 403b was the only plan available for nonprofits, and now a 401k is available. So there are reasons why you might choose one or the other. Discrimination testing, 403b plans are actually exempt from discrimination testing, but that also, the trade-off there is that there are some limitations in plan design. But for the most part, when we talk about employer contributions, you can essentially do the same thing. I find that one of the differences between 401ks and 403bs and the preference for one or the other simply can come down to employee perceptions. And unfortunately, most of those are misconceptions that the 401k is somehow better or that the 403b is somehow inferior. But I will say in our analysis of the two types of plans, we find that in many cases, and this is unfortunate, that 403b plan fees tend to be higher than the 401k counterparts. And there's also fewer providers out there in the 403b space that are offering the record keeping and administrative services. So Jen, thank you. The other side of this discussion is what we call non-qualified plans. So you can have either an ERISA plan or a non-ERISA plan. So if the ERISA plan is not quite meeting that total rewards objective, then where do we go next? And essentially, we look at designing a plan that's going to make sense. So when you think about any sort of retirement plans, there's essentially three phases or components to any long-term savings or investment plan. And that is, you have the contributions to the plan, you have the accumulations, which is the money sitting inside the plan, and then ultimately you have the distributions. So the considerations are really about the tax treatment of each of those three components. So for example, do you want the contributions to be deductible? Would you like the accumulations to have some sort of tax-free or tax-deferred element to them? And then ultimately, how are the distributions taxed? So when designing the plan, typically what happens is, especially in this non-qualified piece, that you might prioritize one and give up a tax benefit on the other. So you might say, well, we'd love to have a tax deduction for contributions, and we're willing to give up favorable tax treatment on distributions. So with non-qualified plans, they are designed specifically for a select group of highly compensated people. Typically, that means the top 10%, just as a rough guideline, the top 10% of those in the organization. But again, the restrictions that are associated with ERISA plans are not typically applied to non-qualified. So we have the ability to pick and choose who will participate, as well as essentially no limit as to what the contributions are or how the contributions are designed from person to person. So there's no necessary, you don't have those proportional guidelines that the 403b or 401k plan will have. So this graph depicts really how the two can be paired together to reach the ultimate objective. And this is where plan design really is the key ingredient. Because if you start with that ERISA plan, because the ERISA plans have most of the tax benefits, it's all of the rules and regs are very black and white, and falling in line with that ERISA plan, you know exactly where you stand from a benefit standpoint. But because oftentimes they can fall short, that because of those contribution limits and any applicable discrimination testing, then we'll look at the non-qualified plan to supplement. So again, that's going to satisfy objectives simply that would allow for either the organization to make contributions for select individuals, or perhaps for the individuals themselves to make contributions to the plan above and beyond the limits of the ERISA plan. So between the two, it really puts us in a nice position to really optimize what the group is going towards. So that's a quick review of the retirement plans, and I'm going to go back over to Dennis, and we'll talk about next steps here.
Great. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. So in terms of next steps, we're going to share these around. So I'm going to quickly just run through these, but just think about your objectives. What are your goals? That's where we all start. All of us on this call that are working in this space, we always want to start with what the goals of the organization are, not with a plan or a strategy, not with a solution, but really understanding your goals. Once we've done that, then really defining who's going to be involved in that, who are the stakeholders, who are the decision makers, taking what's already in place. Many times, certainly on the benefit side, we're not looking to change things. We're looking to say, what do you already have? And do we need just to elevate that and make it more appealing to the executives that you're trying to attract or retain? I mentioned early on, communication is key. Executives understanding what they have. We can't assume that they know what benefits they have or even how their compensation works all the time. So really communication is key. And that a lot of times that means we don't have to change things dramatically just to communicate it better. Get advice, look at what the market is doing, understanding what resources are available to you. Certainly, we all think working with a consultant is the best way to go. We don't recommend anyone doing this on their own. And then optimizing those existing plans for the highly compensated and the executives, and really making the most of those. I'll move on to the next slide, Jen.
In the interest of time, I'm wondering if we skip the next slide and go straight to Q&A. So
sounds great.
Yep. I think we had one question. Or Joanna, do you want to let us know what questions have come up in the chat and we can answer them?
Yes, we have two questions right now. The first one, Jen, came in while you were speaking. What is your recommendation for the level of alignment between the performance management review tool used and application of pay band for staff versus the CEO?
Can you read that again? Sorry.
Sure, and I'll drop it in the chat too so everyone can see.
Yeah, that's easier for me.
What is your recommendation for the level of alignment between the performance management review tool used and the application of pay band for staff versus the CEO?
Yeah, it's a good question. Because boards are in charge of evaluating the CEO, the tool that's used by the board to evaluate the CEO may look a little bit different than the one that's used for staff. Generally, from Edgility's perspective, we would recommend that you implement a performance management program that you can use across the entire organization, and that you pull in the board around the design of that program or share that program design out with them so that they can ensure that they're using something similar or the same when evaluating the CEO. Recognizing, that recognizing that there are going to be exceptions to that. But generally, our recommendation would be to be using a program that's similar across the org. And then when it comes to thinking about where folks are placed on their ranges, CEOs are, of course, going to have their own range. It's going to be separate typically than all other staff in the organization. And we would recommend using similar criteria in terms of placing or moving folks along those ranges. So if merit increases are, let's say 5% for exceeds expectations, generally that's going to be used across all staff and the CEO. So again, working with the board to make sure that what they're recommending for the CEO is in line with what's being done for staff in the organization. Next one.
Yep, there was a second question. What do you recommend when current salary is at the top of the pay band?
Yeah, that's another really good question. Typically, your range high is your maximum. You don't pay above that. So generally, that's a salary freeze. And that doesn't mean that the person has to miss out. What that can mean is paying out any increase they would have gotten as a bonus. So maybe their salary doesn't change because it's at the range high, but say everyone in the org got a 3% COLA, they still receive the 3%. They just receive it as a bonus. And so they're still getting that. They're still getting that dollar amount. It's just that their salary isn't changing. Generally, as their salary starts to fall under the high, they can start going back to receiving increases again. So it's not a permanent freeze, it's just a freeze in that moment until they're back on their bands. The other thing is run a market analysis and see if your bands have shifted. If they're at the range high and you haven't looked at the market in 2 to 3 years, likely that band has shifted 10 to 15% and they're no longer at the range high. They might be closer to the range mid.
And this is where also that total rewards conversation could come into place. So if cash compensation is at the highest band already, certainly that's the time to take a look at alternatives to cash compensation and some of those things that might be attractive for that executive that you just simply can't pay them anymore in cash, but can certainly look at options. And nonprofits, just we won't have time to dive into it today, obviously, but nonprofits have some things available to them that for-profit companies don't have available in terms of compensating executives.
Thank you for adding that perspective as well, Dennis. Really great points around how can you manage when salary is at the high of the range. How can you think creatively around benefits to manage that? There's a survey here. Please take it. The QR code. It takes 30 seconds to complete and just gives us input around your experience today and what we can improve for the future.
Thank you so much. And Jen, Brandy has one question. Can you see the Q&A or no?
I can see it. It looks like a medical dental question. And Brandy, to answer the question is, can you share your thoughts on approaches to equity in medical and dental benefits? For example, if an organization's policy is to cover the full cost of medical and dental plans, this can translate into full family coverage for some and individual coverage for others, and can be perceived as inequitable. And that's true. It can have that perception. There are some ways you can mitigate that. We've tried to get away from cash in lieu of benefits, but sometimes if you're just doing that for the dependents, that's one strategy that you can always look at, is cash in lieu just for if you don't have dependents, just offering that. And there are other options like a health reimbursement arrangement where you can, or flexible spending account where an employer can actually put dollars in that all employees can share in. And certainly, you can use those. If you don't have a family, you can still use those dollars for medical expenses. So outside the scope to really get into an analysis, because we have to see what the plans are and what's in place. But there are options to make that at least more equitable than, hey, we pay for everyone, but if you don't have a family, you don't get as much.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, we are just over time. Brandy, I do see your hand is raised. I'd love to take this conversation offline. I'm sure Dennis would be more than happy to talk to you in more detail about the benefits piece. I do see another question in the chat. We will send out a response to that when we send out the recording. Just want to thank everyone for being here today with us and engaging and your willingness to just learn and be a part of the conversation. So take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.